Great. Like I said, there's invitation cards for you on the back. But I'm not just starting the sermon with this video to promo Alpha. I'm starting it because I would love to not only talk about this topic, but also start with the Alpha spirit. Which is to say, I want you to be honest with yourself this morning. To bring your sincere opinions to the table, to this moment. I'm gonna present some Christian teaching from Luke 19, but then I would love for you to walk away from this ready to sincerely engage with the question that those people engage with in the video, which is, who is Jesus to you? Who is Jesus to you? As you heard in the video, there are lots of different opinions about who Jesus is. And there are probably lots of different opinions right here in this room. All the way from a symbol to a guy who existed to the reason we're all here. A 33-year-old carpenter to my everyday chance at life. There are lots of opinions about who Jesus is. But the question I have for you this morning is, who is Jesus to you? If you were interviewed on the street and asked that question, what would you say? This morning, we get a chance to look at how a few different people would answer that question. And I want to encourage you to sit with that for yourself, because the answer to that singular question can have the power to change the trajectory of your life. As Jesus approaches Jerusalem, we get in Luke chapter 19, like Luke's version of a street interview video montage, asking a bunch of different types of people, who is Jesus to you? The first people that we encounter are the owners of the colt. This colt of this young donkey. Jesus tells his disciples, go to the village ahead of you, and as you enter it, you will find a colt tied there, which no one has ever ridden. Untie it and bring it here. If anyone asks you, why are you untying it? Just tell them, the Lord needs it. So that's what they do. And can we stop here for just a moment to recognize how incredibly bizarre this is? Just like how wild, like if I was just like, hey, Weedy and Lena, if you could just go to San Leandro, in the Nike factory store parking lot, there's a silver Tesla. The keys are inside. Just go ahead and pick that up for me and bring it back here. But if anyone stops you and is like, hey, why are you stealing my car? Just be like, the Lord needs it. I think they would rightfully be like, gonna go find a different church. Because it is audacious, to say the least. I mean, Jesus is basically telling his disciples to commit grand theft donkey. That's what's happening right here. And they do it. They do it. They do it. They go to this town, and they're like, oh, there's the colt. Let's just untie it and leave with it. And then the owners are like, whoa, what are you doing? And they're like, oh, the Lord needs it. And the even crazier thing is, the owners of the colt let them go. They just let them have it. It's not explicit in this version in Luke's gospel, but it is in other gospel stories where it explicitly says, and the owners let them go with the colt. I mean, obviously they did because they brought it back to Jesus. They say the Lord needs it, and they just let them go. Why? Because of their answer to the question, who is Jesus to you? You see, they recognize Jesus as Lord. Lord. Not a word that we use in our everyday vernacular very often. But it isn't just another name for God. Lord meant something very specific. It meant something like master or owner or overseer. Someone that has rights to something. And we see the word Lord 3 times in this passage today, or in this short section of this passage, but we only see it twice in our English translations, in most of our English translations. We see it where Jesus tells his disciples, tell them the Lord needs it. And then we see it where the disciples go ahead and tell them the Lord needs it. But we see it one other time in the original language. As they were untying the colt's lords asked them, "Why are you untying the colt?" It would be weird in our normal way of speaking to call these people the lords of the colt, because it feels like pretty heavy-handed language. But that's just a way of saying the owners of the colt, the masters of the colt, the people who had a right to this colt and to make decisions for it. You see, the little L lords recognized the big L Lord in the person of Jesus. Luke is trying to make the point as clear as possible. They have the right to this animal, but when confronted with the big L, the capital L Lord, they realize his rights supersede their rights, even to their stuff. If some random person on the street walks up to me and is like, "Hey, I need to borrow your car," I feel like I'm in trouble, you know? But hopefully, if I recognize Jesus and he walked up to me on the street and he said, "Hey, I need to borrow your car," I'd be like, "It already belongs to you. You have it, take it, go. You don't even need to call me and tell me when you're bringing it back. It doesn't belong to me." You see, when you recognize Jesus as Lord, it changes the way that you view your belongings. It changes the way you view your decisions. It changes the way you view your life. You start to see your home not primarily as the place for you to escape from the world around you and chill in the evenings, but as a haven for your friends and neighbors who need a place of hospitality, because that's how God is calling you to use it. You start to see your money not primarily as a way to get nice things for yourself or provide for your own security, but as a tool to love God and love others well. You start to see your career not primarily as a way to achieve status or make your mark or make your money, but as an opportunity to serve the Lord day in and day out, not just in what you do, but in how you go about doing it. You start to make big decisions like, where will I live? Who will I marry? What job will I take? By first asking, "Lord Jesus, what would you have me do?" When you recognize Jesus as Lord, it fundamentally shifts your relationship to your own life. The lords of the colt recognize that the Lord's rights supersede their own, so they willingly hand over the donkey colt. They hand it over, but the disciples put Jesus on it. Because they don't just see him as Lord. They recognize him as King. The crowd of Jesus' disciples are the next people that we meet on the street on the way to Jerusalem. And when the camera is turned on them and they are asked, "Who is Jesus to you?" they enthusiastically respond, "He is the true King of God's people." Why would they think that? I mean, Jesus doesn't have an army. Jesus doesn't have he wasn't born to the people who are currently in power. Why would they think that? Well, the text says that they were pondering, they were thinking about, they were praising him for all of the miraculous things that they'd witnessed, the things they'd seen with their own eyes. They'd witnessed him healing a blind man with some mud and some spit. They remember when he calmed the storm with a word. They remember when he fed thousands with some fish, some loaves, and a prayer. They think about the miracles they've witnessed, and that evidence, combined with the fact that they realize, now we're on our way to Jerusalem, to the capital city, and Jesus just asked us to go get a colt of a donkey they put the pieces together. And they realize that Jesus is about to fulfill a prophecy they knew very well from the Old Testament. He was about to fulfill the prophecy of Zechariah 9:9, where the prophet says, "Rejoice greatly, daughter Zion. Shout, daughter Jerusalem. See, your king comes to you. Righteous and victorious, lowly, and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey." They get excited. And so they do just what Zechariah says to do. They rejoice and they shout as they descend from the Mount of Olives into the Kidron Valley on their way up to Jerusalem, into the holy city. The crowd of Jesus followers, they spread their cloaks. They take their own their cloaks off, their sweatshirts, their sweaters off their backs, and they lay them on the dirty, dusty streets so that not even the feet of the colt that Jesus is riding on have to touch the ground. That is how reverent they are of their king. They shout joyful praises, and they say things like, "Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord." They were freestyling on a psalm there, by the way. It says, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." They're like, we'll just add that king part in. You see, the Israelites had been conquered by king after king, empire after empire. Their current king, the ultimate leader, the Caesar of Rome, he made them second-class citizens in their own country, an oppressed people made to pay taxes toward their own oppression. But if Jesus is fulfilling Zechariah's prophecy, they realize Jesus must be the true king. And they think, if he's the true king, that must mean no more Romans, no more oppression. He is going to return our country to us. He is going to make Israel great again. These are the people at the inauguration, the diehards, the folks waving flags because they are confident that this new political leader is going to bring us salvation, put their enemies in their rightful place, and give them control over their land and their futures once again. The best word to describe what they saw in Jesus may be king, but it also may be savior. Because that's what they thought the king was supposed to do. To save them. Not so much from sin and death, but from Caesar and taxes. Not so much from spiritual condemnation, but from political oppression. That's why they praise. Now, I recognize that some of us in this room are firmly in the no kings camp. And in fact, there were probably a decent number of folks yesterday at the No Kings protests here in Oakland or in other cities close by, and I totally get it. We don't trust anyone with that unilateral kind of power, do we? And we know from experience what kind of people tend to be drawn to power like that and what it tends to do to them when they get it. And of course, do to us. The idea that Jesus would be king is actually repulsive to some of us here. If we're honest, if we're bringing our true ideas and opinions to the room, to this moment. And it points to everything that some of us think has gone wrong with American Christianity. It points to a Christianity that seems to have been co-opted by politics and seems to use religion just to grab power over its perceived enemies. We would probably be right there alongside the Pharisees, some of us, saying, hey, rebuke your disciples. Rebuke your disciples. What they're saying is dangerous. It's dangerous to mix politics and religion. The Pharisees were worried about Rome would do, see? It was dangerous to call him the king. The Pharisees are the next people that Luke interviews on the street, that he turns the camera on. And when he turns the camera on them, they say that they recognize Jesus not as Lord, or definitely not as king, but as teacher. As teacher. Teacher, rebuke your disciples. Teacher is a term of respect. I mean, they're not being like, bro, rebuke your disciples. Teacher, rabbi. It's a term of respect. But it's also a signal in the Gospels that they don't follow Jesus and they don't buy in wholesale to everything he teaches. You see, you can be a teacher and not be my teacher. You know what I'm saying? Like, when you go to college, you call everybody there who has this position professor. That doesn't mean I'm in your class. And even if I'm in your class and I use the term respectfully, professor, that doesn't mean I buy everything you're saying. In the Gospels, when someone calls Jesus teacher, part of what it signals is, yeah, but not mine. Not mine. I don't follow you, Jesus. You might have some nice things to say. You might have some good things to say. There was a lot of points, actually, theologically, where Jesus and the Pharisees aligned. But they don't follow him. Maybe you tend to identify more with the Pharisees here. You respect Jesus. You respect him enough to call him teacher, possibly even a prophet, maybe even a holy man. Lord? I think not. I've given up my rights to my stuff, my decisions, my life. That's for religious suckers. King? No. No, definitely not. It's dangerous to mix politics and religion. We think, man, if Christians would just stop focusing on this Lord and King stuff and just focus on Jesus' teachings and living those out, we'd all be in a much better place. And I got to be honest with you. Personally, I have to say, I have no doubt that if Christians followed Jesus' teachings better than we currently do, we would all be in a much better place. That said, the problem with rejecting the other identities that have been brought up in the name of calling him a good teacher is really Jesus' own response to it. Teacher, rebuke your disciples. He says, I tell you, if they keep quiet, even the stones will cry out. Not only does Jesus not rebuke his disciples, he says that there is nothing he could do to keep creation itself, inanimate objects like stones, from praising him. Because you see, Jesus doesn't just see himself as an earthly Lord with property rights or an earthly king with a political endgame. Jesus sees himself as something much different than that. You see, in this street interview, Luke actually turns the camera on Jesus and says, "Who are you to you?" And Jesus' response is, "I am God." Jesus self-identifies as God. You see, Jesus begins to weep over Jerusalem after this encounter with the Pharisees. He weeps over this city. Why? And I quote, "Because you did not recognize the time of God's coming to you." Jesus says, when I come, God comes. When I am present, God himself is present. This isn't the only place in the Gospels where Jesus makes this claim either. You might say, like, oh, well, you could maybe interpret that a number of different ways. You maybe could. You could do some gymnastics and interpret it a handful of different ways. But he makes this claim in no uncertain terms in multiple other places in the Gospels. And they are by far the most reliable and well-attested documents we have to who Jesus was and who he thinks he is. So this creates a real dilemma for us. If we're in the Pharisees' camp, if we're in the teacher-prophet, great moral teacher camp. I'll let the author C.S. Lewis explain it from his book, Mere Christianity. He puts it this way: I'm trying here to prevent anyone from saying the really foolish thing that people often say about him. I'm ready to accept Jesus as a great moral teacher, but I don't accept his claim to be God. That is the one thing we must not say. A man who was merely a man and said the sort of things Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. He would either be a lunatic on the level of a man who says he's a poached egg, or else he would be the devil of hell. You must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman or something worse. You can shut him up for a fool, you can spit at him and kill him as a demon, or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God. But let us not come with any patronizing nonsense about his being a great human teacher. He has not left that open to us. He did not intend to. Do you see what Lewis is saying? He's saying that a good human teacher would not teach that he himself is God. He wouldn't do it. That's cult leader stuff. No one is like, hey, you know who was a really great teacher? Jim Jones. That guy. If we would all just live more like, no one says, man, you know who I think was a really amazing human being we should all model our lives after? David Koresh. Oh man, we would all be so much better off if we followed his teachings. Typically when a leader, when a merely human teacher starts teaching that they themselves are divine, it doesn't end well. Unless, of course, he is. Now, you would expect, you can just look at the evidence. You would expect that a person who is claiming to be God, in order to gain power or influence or authority over people, you would expect that he would use the fact that people perceive him as Lord. That he would use the fact that people perceive him as king in order to get power and stuff for himself. Right? To go into Jerusalem and take the city with all the enthusiasm and the band that he's put together. To grab the throne. That he would use people to get what he wants. To destabilize the regime. To start a cult. That would be evidence that you might be able to point to suggest that his claims of divinity are false and calculated. But let's look at what Jesus actually does in Jerusalem. See, a megalomaniac bent on power would use people's perception of his lordship to gain power and influence that he shouldn't have otherwise had. But what does he do? What does he do? A few days after his arrival into Jerusalem, he gives up his most basic rights, those things that the Declaration of Independence says are our unalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. He gives up his liberty. He gets arrested. He gives up his life. And he goes willingly to his death on the cross. Would a fake Lord doing it for influence do that? He willingly allows himself to be arrested, mocked, crucified, beaten. And a mere man claiming to be king, well, he would lead a rebellion. Like, by the way, many people did at that time, or a handful of people did at that time. He wasn't the only person to try and lead a triumphal entry into Jerusalem in those 50 years. They usually followed with a rebellion that got brutally put down by the Roman oppressors, just as Jesus wept over and predicted would happen, because they were looking for merely political liberation. Jesus, though, he doesn't go in to conquer his enemies. He doesn't go in to unseat the people currently on the throne. And he doesn't lead any kind of rebellion. In fact, when his disciples tried to defend him, when they come to arrest him in the garden, and Peter pulls out his sword and he cuts off a guy's ear, what does Jesus do? He doesn't braveheart it. Forward, He heals, he touches the man, he heals his ear. He says to Peter, no more of this. And then he turns to the people coming to arrest him and he says, am I leading a rebellion? That you come to me with swords and clubs? No, instead, of a crown of gold, Jesus receives a crown of thorns. Instead of a throne, he ascends to a cross. And 3 days later, instead of destroying the sinful power of the Romans, he destroys the power of sin itself. Instead of killing the death-dealing oppressors, he kills the oppression of death itself. Instead of unseating Pilate and Herod and Caesar, he shows that no power in a throne room can compare with the power of an empty tomb. There is a stone that cried out about Jesus' kingship, and it was the stone that rolled away from his grave on Easter morning. The evidence suggests that Jesus was a different kind of king. He is a different kind of Lord. That he didn't use his rights to dominate others. He didn't use up the lives of his subjects to get something for himself. No, he gave up his life. He gave up his rights in order that the people he loves could flourish. That kind of person wouldn't claim to be God. You see, if Jesus is God, he isn't just Lord, he is the Lord of lords. If Jesus is God, he isn't just king, he is the King of kings. And if Jesus is God, he isn't just teacher, he is wisdom incarnate. And friends, when a person like that comes riding into town, the only thing to do is praise him. The only thing to do is shout. The only thing to do is worship. Unlike lesser lords, friends, a Lord like Jesus will never abuse his rights. He'll use them for our good. And unlike lesser kings, he doesn't use up the lives of his subjects in order to secure his throne. He gives his life on a cross to secure our peace. If only we would recognize the time of God's coming to us. Or to put it another way that Jesus puts it, if you, even you, had only known the day that would bring you peace, real peace, lasting peace, the kind of peace that no one can steal from you or oppress away. Friends, we all know all too well the type of teaching, the type of lordship, the type of kingship that doesn't bring us peace. I want to submit to you this morning that if Jesus is who he says he is, and if we recognize him for who he recognizes himself to be, Lord of lords, King of kings, very God, then we will recognize what will bring us peace. Today, Jesus is no longer hidden from our eyes. So the question I want to engage, I want you to be ready to leave with asking and talking about openly. Who is Jesus to you?